Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating paradigm shift about human behavior. Have you ever noticed how the people who try the absolutely hardest to look strong, well, they often end up being the most fragile? It's a pretty strange contradiction. So today, we're going to look closely at some incredible source material that explains exactly why this happens. We're going to discover why true strength might actually be the exact opposite of what you've always been taught.
So, let's just kick things off with a slightly wild question. What do notorious historical dictators and a controlling parent actually have in common? Now, I know that might seem like a totally extreme comparison at first glance, but understanding the hidden link between global tyrants and household bullies, it actually unlocks a profound secret about the nature of power, control, and ultimately, human survival. And you know what? It all comes down to the energy they project. We've got to start with this foundational insight from the ancient philosopher Lao Tzu. He observed that nothing in the world is softer and weaker than water. Yet, for attacking the hard and strong, nothing can surpass it. It's an incredibly profound thought, right? Because it completely challenges our basic, everyday assumption that hard always defeats soft. And Lao Tzu noted a rather chilling corollary to this rule. The strong and violent will not die a natural death. Overwhelming force, just by its very nature, is completely unsustainable.
Section 1. The cost of dominance, the macro and micro destructive effects of control.
Looking at this on a global scale, excessive dominance is a terrible sign. The source text brings up historical examples like Hitler, Saddam Hussein, Gaddafi, Ceausescu, and Stalin. They built their entire identities and their empires on projecting this absolute, unyielding power. But as the text points out, none of them exactly met perfect endings. Their rigid forcefulness ultimately attracted an equally forceful destruction. It turns out when you operate solely through domination, the very system you're trying to control inevitably pushes back with equal intensity. All right, let's scale this way down, right into the living room, because the exact same principle applies at home. As a father, choosing dominance over guidance often results in tragedies that are truly generational. When a father completely takes over his children's lives and suppresses their ideas, often under the guise of just being a good dad, the children, and even the grandchildren, suffer from that suffocating control. The damage echoes far beyond just the single argument. It literally shapes the family lineage.
And you know, this dynamic is just as heavy when we look at a highly controlling mother. The source material explains that a domineering mother can leave her children struggling with deep depression, their spirits become profoundly wounded, and actually, even their physical health can become compromised. Why? Well, because they're constantly living under the crushing weight of excessive criticism and rigid guidance. It just drains their natural vitality and stifles their ability to really grow into themselves.
Moving on to marriages. The results laid out here are pretty heartbreaking. If a husband is domineering, the text notes his wife is going to endure unspeakable suffering throughout her life. Conversely, if a wife is domineering, her husband will live a life of unfulfilled aspirations and likely die with deep regrets. In both of these cases, that absolute rigid need for control ultimately destroys the partnership. It turns what should be a safe haven into a subtle prison for both people.
So what's the big takeaway here? It's the ripple effect. Dominance creates a toxic ripple effect no matter where it happens. Whether it's that neighbor who complains about every single stray leaf blowing onto their lawn, a colleague sparking constant disputes in the break room, or a boss forcing their team into fearful submissiveness, projecting forceful dominance inevitably damages the entire ecosystem around you. Even on a national level, a domineering country constantly invites threats and paranoia, simply because of its aggressive posture.
Which brings us to Section 2, the law of harmony, and why natural systems fundamentally reject absolute power.
Think about the classic concept of the 5 elements: metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. In natural systems, they are split perfectly evenly, at exactly 20% each. They mutually generate and restrain each other in this perfectly equal balance. The flourishing of all things actually relies on this mutual coexistence and shared prosperity. No single element is the boss. It's a continuous, harmonious loop where absolutely everything supports everything else.
But what happens when one of those elements just decides it absolutely has to be the strongest? The dominance of any single side inevitably leads to the withering of the others. And here is the fatal flaw of dominance we keep seeing. Eventually, that dominant side will be left completely unsupported. Without the other elements to sustain it, it faces an inevitable downfall. You simply can't survive if you destroy your own support system just to elevate yourself.
All right, Section 3. The root of forcefulness, the psychological secret behind the mask.
So if being this way is so incredibly destructive, why on earth do people do it? Well,
There is a stark contrast between the outside and the inside. On the outside, sure, you see strong words, forceful actions, domineering behavior. But the inner reality, it's entirely different. From a dialectical perspective, all that outward forcefulness stems from a profound lack of self-confidence and inner weakness. It's basically just an exhausting attempt to cover up internal frailty. It's a disguise, a really heavy suit of armor worn by someone who secretly feels incredibly vulnerable.
On the flip side, let's look at what true inner strength actually is. Individuals who possess actual, undeniable inner strength, they don't need to shout, they don't need to control the room. They are gentle and approachable. They are so much like that water Laozi described back at the beginning of our explainer, adaptable, unassuming, yet incredibly powerful because they aren't wasting a single ounce of energy projecting an artificial, rigid force. They just simply are.
Moving into Section 4, the strength in softness, and how we actually apply the power of yielding.
If you're a parent tuning in, these practical guidelines are absolute gold. The goal is to inspire your kids, not to take over their lives. You have to allow them to have their own independent thoughts and plans. Provide profound love and nourishment, but consciously step back to avoid that excessive criticism. You've got to completely resist the urge to make every single choice or decision for them. True parenting strength, it's giving them the safety to stumble.
When it comes to your partner, the source text doesn't sugarcoat it. Give your partner as much space as possible. The text notes a really hard truth. No matter how right you think you are, a tangled relationship mess simply cannot be forced apart. If you pull too hard, the knot literally just gets tighter. The ancients couldn't untangle it, people today can't, and people in the future won't either. The only real solution is yielding and giving space.
Now, if you need a purely selfish reason to drop the whole domineering act, well, here it is. Being forceful will only exhaust you mentally and physically. Remember, projecting that forceful energy doesn't just harm your spouse, your kids, or your coworkers. It will entirely drain you of your own well-being. It is a massive, completely unnecessary drain on your own battery. Letting go of control is actually the ultimate act of self-preservation.
But what if you're on the receiving end? What if you're the one dealing with a domineering person? When you inevitably encounter someone projecting all that rigid force, the source text offers this really beautiful coping philosophy. Let him be strong. The breeze brushes the hill. Let him be fierce. The moon shines over the river. Remain completely unbothered. Let their artificial force blow right past you, just like a light breeze against a solid, unmoving hill. Their storm does not have to become your weather.
I'm going to leave you with this final thought. Take a look at your relationships and really reflect on where you might have been projecting rigid force. If nothing is softer than water, but absolutely nothing can surpass it in defeating the hard, how are you going to choose to yield today to discover your true inner strength?